The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. As Jesus was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a sizable crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind man, the son of Timaeus, sat by the roadside begging. On hearing that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me." And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he kept calling out all the more, "Son of David, have pity on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called the blind man and said to him, "Take courage, get up. Jesus is calling you." He threw aside his cloak, sprang up, and came to Jesus. Jesus said to him in reply, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man replied to him, "Master, I want to see." Jesus told him, "Go your way, your faith has saved you." Immediately he received his sight and followed him on the way. The Gospel of the Lord.
There are many accounts of Jesus curing the blind. This one is remarkable because of a number of details that are highlighted by Mark, which is not usual for Mark. Mark tends to be one who just speeds through his telling of the gospel. You get a lot of and then, and just keeps going and going and going. And it's like a train that just has started down a hill and it can't possibly stop. So he doesn't usually pause to go into much detail, but there's some remarkable details about this one. One detail that is missing is it doesn't say whether or not this man was born blind or not. He was a blind man. Whether he had lost his vision at some point or whether he was always blind, it doesn't say. I think it would be remarkable for me if this was a man born blind. There was a movie several years ago, and I know that it's been treated in other eras as well, about someone who was born blind, had always been blind their entire lives, and I don't know whether it was science fiction or not, but apparently they were able to do some kind of surgery on him, and he was able to regain his sight. And I remember how they depicted that moment when he opened his eyes and light was coming in for the first time. To a person who had never seen light, who had never experienced it, it was overwhelming. And all the colors as he began to try to live his life, he who had been limited to the darkness and relied on all of his other senses was now flooded with all this color and sight and clarity, and it was just so confusing to him. And it was too busy for him. And he almost preferred to have returned to his blindness. So it's remarkable that Bartimaeus, who is named, because Mark doesn't typically name the characters that show up around Jesus, except for the disciples. He has a name probably because he was a success story, because he was able to take his new sight and be able to follow Jesus and probably became a leader in the Christian community. He was very specified, Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, so that the listeners of Mark's gospel, of his recounting of the life of Jesus, would go, "Oh yeah, Bart, We know him. But this idea that somebody would prefer the darkness, and yet I sometimes wonder if that isn't our case. That there were things that he lost, that he might have lost in regaining his sight. Would his heightened sense of hearing be dulled? Would his more acute sense of smell be lost? Or would he be able to retain all of that and become super? Who knows? But let's go through some of the other details that are remarkable about today's gospel. One, this, again, Mark always depicting Jesus on the go, 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 go. He finishes one thing and he's on to the next, on to the next, on to the next. So he's in Jericho and he's already predicted that he is going to Jerusalem to die, and he's heading on his way with all these people following him and all this crowd moving in a great throng, and there's this one voice that pierces through and says, "Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me." And Jesus stops. We often talk about God and his plan, right? And we try to figure out how we're supposed to fit into God's plan. Do we ever stop and wonder that God might actually stop for us? That God might actually pause in his plan, in the great machine of life, and say, "Wait a minute, what do you need?" But that's exactly what happens here. God stops. Jesus stops in his tracks. Then immediately the next thing he says, "Call him." Who does he say that to? To those around him. He uses the church to bring someone to him. Jesus uses an intermediary. That's an important point. There are many who think that, if I feel like I've committed a sin, I could just go directly to Jesus and have him forgive my sins. That's what Bartimaeus was trying to do. But Jesus himself puts intermediaries in between and says to the disciples and those following him, "Call him, you bring him." That's the church. That's us. That's us, and that's us ministers as well. Jesus wants to involve the church in bringing people to him. Third thing, he says to him, "Have courage." And what do you want from me? Now picture this. This is a blind man who has sprung up, throws his cloak aside. Blind man. You know, when I graduated from high school, from college, from graduate school, and that moment when they declare that you are now a graduate of the institution, and everyone throws their hats in the air, their mortar boards, I didn't. My thought was, what if I can't find my hat and they charge me for it? So I did not throw my hat in the air. And I can see this guy throws his cloak off. Where to? Who knows? He doesn't know what color it is. He doesn't know what it looks like. But he casts it aside like he would never need it again. And he leaps forward to go to Jesus. And how he's going to find this man that he's only heard of, who knows? But you can rest assured that he is not making a beeline to him. He's stumbling his way, and they're kind of leading him. And they bring this guy before him, and he says, "What do you want from me?" What are you talking about? Isn't it obvious? But Jesus forces him to name his problem, to name his need, to acknowledge it and give voice to it. How often I've heard the argument, I don't need to go to confession because God knows my sin and he wants to forgive me. Well, here he made him name it, and he made him ask for it. What do you want me to do for you? Bartimaeus says, I want to see. It's obvious. When you're in a confession, you say, I want to be forgiven. It's obvious, but you need to say it. There's something psychologically profound and important about voicing your need, to giving it that strength, that acknowledgement that you have this need and you want something done about it. So he asks for what he needs, and Jesus gladly obliges. But he does it in this way, deflecting it off of himself. He says, go, your faith has saved you. Not, I'm going to do this for you. Your faith has saved you. Where did he see this faith? Please notice that this is the first time in Mark's gospel that someone has said aloud, in public. Peter had said it at one point, but in private, and he didn't know what he was saying. But he uses a messianic address, Jesus, son of David. That's messianic. He knows he's addressing the Messiah. He has faith. And that's why he's so insistent on calling out to him. And he had that vision, that insight, that knowledge while he was blind. So one of the most important things that Bartimaeus has to teach us is that seeing isn't believing. Believing is seeing. When we believe, our senses are heightened to the presence of God. We know more clearly how God is acting in the world, in our universe, and in our own lives. And then we can boldly cast off those things that we cling to as being absolutely essential to our existence. We can throw those off like Bartimaeus casting off his cloak, and we can go to the Lord because we know he will do for us. Our faith has let us see that he can accomplish what he needs to in our lives. So let's not cling to our darkness. Let's let our faith give us sight. Let's let our faith give us light. And let's go to the Lord and ask him for what we need.